Erev Tov, bonsoir, kalispera shas, guten Abend. I'm very honored to see so many people here that I know, and some of them who knew my father, so it's a blessing for me. My name is Yisca. If I am not understood well, maybe you want to stop and ask what I meant to say. English is not my native language, and for some of you maybe also it's not your native language, so please feel free to stop and ask. I'll first say that my name is Yisca, and some of you may not have heard that name because maybe you don't bother reading all the names in the book of Genesis, but in chapter 11 of Genesis, you will find that I'm the niece of Abraham. Yeah. And in some places around the world, it's difficult to pronounce the sound y. Like instead of Yisrael, you say Israel, or Yerushalayim comes Jerusalem. So I think that Yisca landed the Jessica that you know. But I'm not sure all philologists will sign on that. So anyway, Yisca Harani. By the way, Haran in the Bible is my father. But I'm married to someone called Harani. So, good evening. Oh, wow, Professor Mazzini. Oh, shalom. What an honor. So, I grew up in Jerusalem. I was actually born in Jerusalem 62 years ago on Shvi'i Shel Pesach, on the 7th day of Pesach, the day of the parting of the Red Sea, and into an observant Jewish family. My father was a professor in Hebrew University. He was one of the founders of the study of religions. So it was not strange for me to grow up in an observant Jewish home and have a lot of non-Jewish people come and share our Shabbat meals or Pesach meals. So if people ask me, why do I choose to give my life to interreligious relationships, is because it was very normal to me. I thought the world was a very, very pacified place where people meet others on nice meals, and it doesn't take a long time to grow up and see that that's not the reality. I studied the field of humanities. I didn't intend to be an activist in the field of religions. I was just interested to study what was not mine. So I studied Islam and Christianity because I thought I knew Judaism, which is of course a naive thought because nobody really knows everything that needs to be known. And then I found myself more and more drawn into the study of Christianity, and then more and more I found myself to live in the world that we live today, where we need to teach and to engage somehow with each other, because that's the reality. The reality is that I was born in Jerusalem when the city was divided, but the city had Muslims and Christians when it was divided and after it was sort of put together. So finally, I want to tell you that what I do, I teach Israelis all over for many, many years, and maybe I'll later explain why I have this very strange picture here. I think only Father Martin maybe knows what that is. This is Oberammergau, the Passionsspiel. But I will start with this. I was a guide on behalf of the Society for the Protection of Nature. This is what I did in my first years as a young adult. And being a nature guide, we didn't care much about human beings. We cared about butterflies and beetles and gazelles And only here and there we would end up in a church. I was a guide in the desert area. So this is not from Mamshit, this exact mosaic, but doesn't matter, it illustrates. I would go to Mamshit where there is a church. I was not yet studying religions, but I was a nature guide, and we were taking also people to this place where there was a church. Now, in the church in Mamshit, there is a sign saying altar. In Hebrew, Mizbeach. Now, growing up the way I grew up, I knew that if there's a Mizbeach, there got to be somewhere a goat, a knife, and someone practicing the slaughter of an animal. And I remember myself, as we were going into this church, keeping asking myself, because it was not a part of our training, we were just generally speaking about the Nabateans who were there and how were there sort of Bedouins who moved to do agriculture. So I really remember, and I fully admit that it's embarrassing, but I'll tell you because I'm 62 and I don't mind to tell you what I did when I was 20. I would tell people, you see, probably this room here is where they kept the goats. And you see, probably from here they brought it. So complete confusion, even though I was the daughter of a professor of religions. But we were not really taught what is happening in the church. So this is for me just a start to tell you, we live in a place where we are very close to Christians and to Christian presence. We don't know, well, maybe as much as we, as others, don't know our story. Now, there is the other end and the other extreme of what I do. I love guiding in nature. For many years I don't do it. Last year I took 3 groups of Israelis to a place in South Germany called Oberammergau, where every 10 years there's a passion play put on stage, 6 hours or so of listening in German language about Jesus from his entry to Jerusalem until his resurrection. Why on earth would I do that, and who would sign up as a Jewish Israeli to listen to 6 hours in German about the story of Jesus? So that is because, as you see, one of my groups, it's a big group, some 30-something people, are those Israelis that are interested in Christianity from a cultural point of view, and some of them more than cultural point of view, but no one from the point of view of conversion. Nobody comes to me in order to decide if they want to change their religion. I'm teaching 30 years and I've not changed my affiliation and my faith. So these people have come with me because for me it was very important to show the transformation that was made in the text. And the textbook, I didn't bring it, but I have the textbook of the previous years. I was there in 2010. That's when I decided I will do it in 2020. Because of Corona, it was a bit postponed. But anyway, the text is an incredible, courageous dealing with a problematic issue. That's the one I want to share with you. For me, teaching about Christianity, it's like the Jewish-Arab dialogue, or when I was in the desert meeting with Bedouins. It's not about sharing hummus together. It's not about eating falafel together. It's about really trying to get to the core and to be very genuine about what we share and what we have in difference. So, I'll tell you, 2 women that you see here were my students. They did not come with me to Oberammergau. One of them passed away a year before. But this is what I already from the start want to tell you are the moments of grace that I have. When I teach Christianity to Jewish people, why would Jewish people want to hear about Christianity? Well, many of them don't. I think most Israelis don't study about Christianity. When we study in school, we study the very minimal that we need to know. For example, if we study about Second Temple period, it may be noted that in this period, Jesus of Nazareth came around, from which came the new religion. The next step will be the study of the anti-Semitism in Europe throughout different periods, and then we'll meet it again when we come to Holocaust studies. So most people really don't know. So who would come? Usually I teach, not in the school system, and I don't teach in university. I have one course in Hebrew University, but the reason why people come and pay money to study about Christianity is because they are curious, because all these years there was zero information about Christianity. And as the world opened up, they became curious. The more you go abroad and you see the world, the more you get culture, you want to understand. So it's usually coming from a cultural perspective. But very many times I had people who at the very end of a course came up to me, like these two women, to say, well, thank you for the course. We came here because we wanted to know who were the people who saved us when we were in the Holocaust. So if I'll just take an example of the lady that you see here on the left, Tirza Dvir. So she hid with her mother during the Holocaust. And when she came to study with me, she was always sitting with bright eyes and learning and listening. And only at the very end of the course, she came and presented the book, which is the book she wrote about her life. And she said, I really wanted to understand what it was around me as a child that was so crazy. And the other woman was the most amazing moment that I had, and that is in schools. We have people who survived the Holocaust to come and speak to our children just before Holocaust Day. And so the lady on the right, she was giving such an amazing talk to the children when one of my sons was in the age when so parents were invited. And at the very end, I went to this lady and I said to her, you are amazing. You were such an amazing person to tell a story because you spoke about it in such a humane way. You said, children, remember, the only rule you have to learn from this is to be humane. That's it. She didn't instill hate. She didn't go into this, trap of making everybody antagonistic. And then she turns to me and she says, oh, so you don't recognize me, huh? And I said, no, I don't. She said, I've been to all your courses. Now, it's very embarrassing, but sometimes somebody can sit in the back. I don't see the faces. And I said, really? She said, your courses were very instrumental for me because I wanted to know if those that saved me under the risk of their lives and their family lives, because apparently she was for a long time in a kind of a potato cellar somewhere in Poland. And she said, I wanted to know whether those that saved me because they were human or because they were good Catholics. So these are moments of grace that I have, and I can tell you a lot of stories, but it's not my thing now. I just wanted to share with you that teaching Israelis is teaching all the gamut of people who are antagonistic and people that have a kind of a soft spot vis-a-vis the crazy world that they've undergone with Christianity, from the worst to the most humane. Okay? Now I'm coming to very, very recent thing that I just had. I was accompanying one of the Armenian processions. We have a group that accompanies the Armenian processions. We have yellow vests. If you sometimes see us near the Cenacle, then we are a civil society that walks and tries to guard from extremist Jews. There's the police, there's the Armenian processions, and there are extremists. So this is our role. So after finishing this, I could join for a little while to see the Easter Mass of the Latin Rite. So I was holding the book that was given to me by one of the people around, and I was, oh, look, there's the book of Acts. I'm right now in the middle of teaching a long course, which I started during Corona period, because in Corona period, every institution was closed. So what I did, I started running my Zoom courses, and one of them is a Zoom course called 260. That's the number of the chapters in the New Testament. We are reading every chapter every week. By now, we have accomplished almost 105 chapters. So I have just 150 something to go. So at the moment, we're in the book of Acts. So I was very, very happy, and I pulled it just to take a picture and send it in the WhatsApp group so that you will see. I have 70 people who are studying with me all the four Gospels now in the chapter 15 of book of Acts. And then one of them is saying to me, wait, why are you so joyful? Look at what is written here. And yeah, okay, I didn't have the time to contemplate about the reading, but the reading, as you know better than I do, says here, and we are witnesses of all things which he did both in the land of the Jews and in Jerusalem, whom they slew and hanged on a tree. So, my students, which are clearly people with interest, with desire to study, but being Jewish, immediately they spot a sentence and say, hey, what is this terminology? Why is this chosen? And this lady who wrote to me, she says, of all passages, because some passages are cut and pasted in a way, why is this there? Okay? So, just in general to know, with my students, one of the important things for me is to meet with Christian scholars. I'm very happy that Professor Pazzini is here because back many years ago, I used to bring some of my classes to meet with him, and I kept that going all throughout the years. As a matter of fact, I stepped into this institution some 30 years ago or less when Father Jerome Murphy O'Connor was here, and we had a round table with several scholars when I put forth my program to teach an in-depth course, a course of 50 lectures and 6 days tours for tour guides to really understand as much as they can, far more, what is needed in order to engage with a faithful pilgrim. Now, in the round table discussion that we had, came about the question that I posed. Is there any merit, is there any advantage in having a Jew, like myself, teaching Christianity? Why not have it that the Christians will teach the entire course? Why am I needed? Doesn't it make sense that a Jewish person will teach Jewish people what Christianity is? What was very amazing is that in this round table, no one, including Professor and Father Jerome Murphy O'Connor, had a good answer. They like, no, maybe it's not such a good idea. The only person who said something of like a encouragement was Father David Newhouse, with whom I've been teaching in the last 30 years every year. So he said two things. He said, well, at least the Israelis that were born here, and part of their education is to walk the land, they know topographically, they feel it in with their feet, what this land is, so they can transmit it. And the other thing is that maybe they can pass the obstacle of Jews hearing Christians teach them about Christianity. So this is where I want to tell you that I begin my role as a Jewish person, faithful to my religion and to my parents' traditions. I can teach, and I have the trust of the people. Of course, I will have to say there are my limitations in how I teach, because very quickly you will understand that it's easier for me to teach Jesus the Jewish than Jesus the Christ. But it's part of my duty to say, well, listen to this. When you will meet your people, you must tell them, we can speak about the Jesus that we could converse with, but you have also another Jesus, which it is not our role to direct to you. So here are some of the pictures of the people that we meet, and also they come, not only we come to them, they come to us. So in this case, for example, you can see, wait, is it up there? Okay, so up there is Father Roman from the Russians, down is Father David, and believe it or not, I don't know if you recognize, this is Naim Atik, who came to Yad Ben Tzvi, all right? Yad Ben Tzvi is the second president house, which is a big institution of studies. So even he would agree to come to my courses to teach and present, which is in itself a big deal, okay? So this is what I do, just to begin with, and now we come to the difficulties. What are the difficulties? It happens every so often. The Jewish people will come and tell me, yes, but they, the Christians, and begin to tell me all the horror stories of the history, which are, yes, difficult. And I have to say, yes, but you know, this Arab Christian that lived here, he wasn't really in the pogroms of Ukraine, Eastern Europe, or this Christian nun who came maybe from Africa was not a member of the Inquisition, okay? So you just have to separate. But many times people come and the scars of what we were having in history come out. I will tell you what happened to me last year. That's where I met it. Last year, after Corona, we decided to go to Madrid. And because our plane was delayed, we found ourselves having to change the place we were supposed to sleep with another place called La Guardia. It's not too far away from Madrid. I only knew that there's such an airport in America. I didn't know that there's a village called La Guardia. So when we came to La Guardia, we found something completely amazing. This is a wall, a mural, that shows the yearly celebration of La Guardia. Anyone here knows something about La Guardia? Have you heard about that? Okay. The place is celebrating a saint called Santo Niño. Now, Niño is a baby, right? I was sure Santo Niño is little Jesus, but it's not. Now, we had no idea because it was completely a mistake of the airlines that we ended up in La Guardia. But in the morning, I see a monastery. I go up to the monastery. So I go and I see this, and there is this nicely plaque made of ceramic, which is typical to Spain. Very nice. First of all, we opened Google to see about La Guardia and Santo Niño, so we already have an idea that it is not going to be nice. But what we found, which is quite horrible and shocking, is that this display, and I'm talking about myself, I'm the most interreligious educator, and I don't like it when people come and start throwing at me the pogroms and the Inquisition. But I'm looking at this and I'm seeing the Jews that are being burnt at the stake because they have murdered a baby and used the blood to whatever ritual needs. What struck me most than anything was the inscription below. The dedicatory inscription shows that it was put in 2004. Now, if I were to see that and say, well, this is a tradition of medieval times, but someone in 2004 thought that this story is real. Now, I taught recently, and thanks to Father Gregoire, I was teaching in St. Anne. And I taught the people, and I said something about blood libels, and one of them raised a hand and said, we've never heard of blood libels. And he looked in the Wikipedia, and it says ritual murders. So these are like two expressions for the same thing. So what I want to tell you is, yes, we have a burden on our shoulders. We have a burden. Does that bring all of the problem to the table? No. There are more problems, and I apologize if I show problems. Believe me, I come now with a package on my shoulders of what my people are doing when they are spitting at you people. So believe me, I'm myself in a complete schizophrenia. So I'm not coming here now to throw arrows. Nobody should throw arrows. Just listen to the anguish of all. Okay? So, when I grew up, there was still alive a very famous judge, a high court justice by the name of Chaim Cohen. He was a German Jew in origin who came as a young child. He came from an Orthodox family, and he wrote the book called Mishpato vemoto shel Yeshu HaNotzri, The Trial and Death of Jesus. It's interesting because in the Hebrew it's Yeshu HaNotzri, Jesus the Christian. Now when he said Yeshu, it was not in order to say something bad. This was the word that was used back at the time when I grew up. Nobody, at least in my family, told me that Yeshu is a bad word, that it should be Yeshua. So when he writes this, it just writes. Now, what does he write? He writes a study. Now, he's a judge. He's a legal professor. Why is he now writing a book about history? So this is why it happened. After the establishment of the state, priests from Holland, Germany, and England petitioned to the chairman of the Israeli High Court and asked to renew the trial of Jesus. You can imagine in the 50s, a letter coming to Israel, signed by pastors in Europe. Their claim was that since now, for the first time in 2,000 years, Jews have an autonomous Jewish court, just like, or perhaps even more autonomous than that of the past. It is our sacred duty to first and foremost acquit Jesus from any fault and undo the wrongs done by the Sanhedrin. This is what he explains to the interviewer that asked him, what is it? Why are you writing? He said, well, we didn't really answer those pastors, but it came into my mind that I want really to investigate that story. And then as a judge, and I will not read it because we don't have too much time, but he's very, very somberly and seriously and beautifully writes how the testimonies of the gospel writers should be viewed as he, as a judge, listens to several witnesses and tries to compose something, but also tries to see what is right and what is wrong. This is very interesting, and with pleasure I can give you the presentation, some nice quotations here. So here are just some words about him, Chaim Herman Cohen, who was really an outstanding person, a real genius, and a man of very good heart and liberal good views. So this is exactly what they asked him in the interview. And how down below it says, after Judge Zmora had sent me the petitions, I had begun to research the subject. And okay, so he has his view why, and I'll write down below, the emphasis on the other hand of the Jews' hatred of Jesus and their great interest in removing him both from the communities and from the face of earth might have, or so they thought, improved the Christians' worth in the eyes of Rome. He is perhaps the first book that I read, because it was a book that was back then a bestseller, like in the 70s or the 80s, and it was saying, look, this is a composition which tries to better the situation of Christians in a Roman world. How? Instead of persecuting the Christians, you will know that the Jews are the bad ones. So he started giving an answer about why things come up so difficult in the words of the Gospels or in the New Testament. Okay, I'll run with this. Now, finally, I found an interview in one of the newspapers, which I thought was very striking, because in this newspaper, the final summary of his perception of this high justice in Israel about the story of Jesus is this: the novelty in the trial and death of Jesus lies, firstly, in the identity of its author. This is the first book on this matter composed by a supreme judge in Israel, and secondly, in its conclusion. Against the evangelist's claims, the Sanhedrin did not attempt in charging Jesus, but in saving his life. So finally, he came with a hypothesis which is completely not accepted in any research, as far as I know, and that is that the Sanhedrin was actually trying to give him a kind of a rehearsal how to stand in front of Pontius Pilate, and when the high priest understands that this man is stubborn and he will continue to say what he thinks, then he rips his clothes and he says, that's it, he's doomed. So what do I take from this? The Jewish people, even a high justice like Chaim Cohen, one of the smartest men we had in the history of Israel, are trying to negotiate this story, as if really we have to give an account of if we're guilty or we're not guilty. To me, this was like one of the moments when I said, this is so interesting. A high justice in Israel is trying to acquit us, to exonerate us? Why? Am I responsible for this? And this really drew me more and more into the study of Christianity. And I'm very thankful to all my professors in Hebrew University and in Tel Aviv University. And finally, when I am teaching, and I'm teaching a lot and many years, I'm teaching the texts. And when I find the text difficult, I have to summarize what are the difficulties that my students see, even if I don't mean to show them the difficulties. As a matter of fact, when I started teaching, I would teach only the nice things. I picked only the beautiful things. And it turned out that everything was wonderful. But once I started teaching the tour guides, and the tour guides couldn't settle with the Sermon on the Mount or the prodigal son. They needed to guide Via Dolorosa. That's what they need. Or in Caesarea, they need to guide why Paul is arrested there. And that's when I started teaching the text, and that's when I get the boomerang. You know boomerang? Okay? I'm sending something, and then, hey, what is going? So, first of all, I want to summarize the 6 places where my students are attacking me. Thank God. They're saying, why are you so positive? Look at this. Terms for Jews who do not believe in Jesus. What are the terms in the New Testament? Judaism, which is characterized as halachically petty. The motivation and responsibility for the charging and sentencing of Jesus. 4, who killed Jesus? Period. What it says, who killed Jesus? 5, who is persecuting the apostles and the communities of Jesus' believers? And the portrayal of Jews in parable literature. 6 points, which I find very difficult to teach. But that's it. We have to settle with this. So, first of all, I teach my students as a historian. I have a heart for theology and spirituality, but I teach as a historian. So for my students, it is teaching about crucifixion and about crucifixion in Rome and what evidences we have that, so I don't need to tell you. Then I teach them about the different compositions in the New Testament with all the questions of should we read them together or should we read them separately. For you, it will be quite simple to understand that when I teach even about the figure of Judas, most of them will ask me, so is this an intended thing to call him Judas because it's closer to the word Judaism? And then I go, well, there was another saint who was also called Saint Jude. It's not this. But what I want to tell you is that Jewish people immediately feel like it is a personal attack. And this personal attack, and here I show you even the 2 versions about the death of Judas. So some of them will say, well, he regretted. And I will say, yes, but there's also a version that he did not regret, that he had to pay a price. Now, for my cultured audience, for them, it will be very, very interesting to ask, why is it not possible that Judas betrayed Jesus because he was ideologically motivated? It's not a matter of money. It's not a matter of being a small person. Everyone read, at least from the people that I teach, read Amos Oz book called Habesora al Pi Yehuda, or in English just Judas, where Judas is completely an ideological person. And many of them will come and say, well, maybe they didn't even want to give him the credit of an ideologically motivated person who for some reason said, well, he's going wrong or this and that. Well, when I teach also the culture of the world, and I'll show you something of that, because many of my listeners guide abroad. I teach Israelis who guide abroad. So many times they ask me, okay, teach about Christianity in Orthodox lands, teach about Christianity in South America, sometimes places I've never been to, but I will give them the exposition. So I definitely was in Greece, and here I can show you this, which you probably know, and that is the custom of what to do with Judas on the night of the resurrection. So I hope you can hear me. There's a little bit of sound, but one of the most beloved traditions is the burning of Judas. And you see the whole village, whole communities celebrating the preparation of Judas, the mayor of the village introducing the tradition. As in one of the times I was in Greece, they told me, you have to go to Larissa. There they burn the most beautiful Judas. So if this is on YouTube, it means they're very proud and they want to share. Okay, and in another place, even more fantastic, it's a place where people even come specially to the seashore to watch this, and it's reported on television. And now there are boats around that throw. Okay, you got the point. So, everything that may seem to be a folklore, something that for other people will be like, you may say, oh, it's not our taste. We don't like when they burn figures of humans anyway, right? But you will not take it personally. But when an Israeli returns from Greece after whatever Easter vacation there, usually I get this. Did you see what they do? Do you see what it means? What are the consequences of this? Okay, now, very quickly, I'm not going to show you all of this, but when I'm teaching, one of the biggest problems that I have, after I've persuaded everybody that the prodigal son and the good Samaritan and everything is beautiful, comes the question of what are the names for Jews who do not believe in Jesus. And it is clear that after 70 times in the Gospel of John that the word Jews is used, and except salvation comes from the Jews, most of the cases are tough cases, this is when I know that my listeners understand that Jews is we. It's not people 2,000 years ago. And it's partially our fault. Why? Because Jewish people keep on saying, yes, we are the Jews. We are a continuation from Bible. We are a continuation of David. We are a continuation of the returns, those that return from exile. So if we insist all the time, then, well, when it says Jews, does that apply to us? Yes or no? So those hypocrites, those sons of Satan, brood of vipers, should we take it personally? Should we not? Okay, surely my people are seeing the danger of it. Now, the pettiness of the law. Now, I'm very lucky again, thank you, Father Gregoire, that I'm coming to St. Anne to teach. And last year, I came with my students from Discourse 260. And we had the most amazing thing, because I had, how many, maybe 40 people. From your group, there were also some, that number. And they sat and talked together. And it was a beautiful moment of interreligious connection and truly love. But that very day, when we went around the pools and we read the story about the healing of the crippled man, and immediately afterwards, that what is the climax of this story? The revival of the person, or the climax of the story is the pettiness of the Jews who don't mind a miracle, they mind only to carry the bad. Okay? To tell you that I've not witnessed myself petty Jews, I will tell you. Sorry for the digression, but I will tell you. 3 years ago, a dear friend of mine passed away on Mount of Olives. She was a nun at the age of 90. Her name was, when she was a baby, was Rachel Dronjek. She was a Jew, born to Jewish family, most of which perished in the Holocaust, in Lomża in Poland. Her life story is now in a book in Polish. It was now, right now, it was published, because all her writings were published. So she was saved somehow, and she became a nun, Benedictine nun, and eventually somehow God led her to be in Jerusalem among her people, but as a Christian nun. I met her because with my interreligious connections, it was very important for me that my students will meet monks and nuns, and as far away as it is, they should meet and talk. Now, she never spoke to my groups. The one who spoke was the Mother Superior at the time, called Mère Christine, who spoke beautiful Hebrew. But Mère Christine many times told me, you have to stay, I want you to meet someone. And this is how I was introduced to Sister Paula, who was brought up as Rachel. Now, where is the pettiness of my story? When she died, and I was getting a call from the monastery, I felt like I wanted to say Kaddish. Do we all know what Kaddish is? like the Hebrew prayer, which we say every day. It's not just for funerals, but most people associate it with funerals. And I asked the sisters if I could say Kaddish. After few days, in her few papers that she had, we found a clip from a newspaper that she cut where it said that Cardinal Lustiger, when he died, he asked that his family will say Kaddish, and they did say a Kaddish outside Notre Dame Church in Paris. You know this story? So she had a clip, and I said, so it was a message. And you will not believe it if I show you, I didn't bring it. A month later, because it took time to go over her papers, there was a paper where she wrote in her handwriting the Kaddish, and down below she wrote in Hebrew and in Latin letters, Yisca, my name. She never told me. She never asked me. It was in her drawer. Now, at one gathering that I had with Jewish and Christian people together, a group that cooperates a lot here in Israel, I told the story of Sister Paula and saying that although I'm a woman, I said Kaddish there. In the cemetery, in this Christian burial rite. And one of the men, a religious Jew, said, in front of the whole group, he said, well, so you're a woman and said Kaddish, that's not a big deal. But were there 10 Jews that you could have said Kaddish? Because you know the law is that you have to have minyan, 10 people to say Kaddish. Like, what? So I'll tell you, listen, I know petty people. I've seen petty people in my own and in other places. But when I come to this story, and I'm coming with a lot of compassion to tell a great story in a place which archaeologically is fantastic, I can really prove the New Testament records at least locations that are 100% the place. This story is not good for me. It doesn't do the work. And what do I tell my tour guides when they said to me, but how do we continue from here? Do we let them read and that's it and go and afterwards tell them, but I'm not petty. I don't mind if you take your pallet on Shabbat. Okay? All right. And you can see all these examples where people are upset. All that chapter 20 through in Matthew, etc. Now, what are the motivations and what is the responsibility of Jewish people to the sentencing of Jesus? So I'm showing them how in one gospel you have the crowd and in another gospel you have the high authorities. I'm doing a lot of work. Really, I'm reading because, why? Because tour guides will later hear it when they go with their pastors and with their priests. So I want them to know the text. I want them to have good and intimate understanding of it. But the problem is big. You see, down below it says, they insistently demanded, and their shouts prevailed. Now you know these texts. Why should I tell you what you know? Because I want you to understand what it resonates. And I'm the Jewish person to teach that. So I'm okay. I'm on your side. Or their side. I don't know. I'm on everybody's side. But I'm trying to teach you what is their feeling. Their feeling is, that's it. This is a picture from Ober Ammergau, from the Passion Play. Okay? So I will just take one thing, and I know that you've heard already my hypothesis about that, but I will say it nevertheless. The story in Matthew, which, as you know, would probably irritate or agitate, concern every Jew who hears the words of Matthew when he says, I'm innocent of the man's blood. It is your responsibility, and the people answer, his blood is on us and on our children. And This is important because it's not only in art everywhere in the world, but it is right there when my guides take the groups and begin the Via Dolorosa. Okay? What do I do with this? So for me, teaching from a perspective of someone who studied Judaism and Christianity, for me that story of blood and washing the hands from the blood is a typical misunderstanding for me, okay? That this is a story being told by someone who knew Judaism, but it's not necessarily the reality of what Pontius Pilate said. Now, I'm willing to engage afterwards in a talk, but I'm telling you how I teach, honestly. I think that many texts, as far as I have been studying history, cannot be the reality. Even though later I will hear it in Matteo's Passion, and my cultured public will know it from art and from music and from literature. Here is where I want to take you. I want to take you to the fact that in Deuteronomy, that's the source of the story. And I'm not surprised that the Gospel of Matthew, or that Matthew, who is so immersed in the Hebrew Bible, will tell us this story. Because it is something that we read in the synagogues. It's a parasha, okay? We have a parasha, we have a portion every year called Egla Arufa, which means a slaughtered cow, young cow. It's in Deuteronomy that if a body is found between two tribes, nobody knows who slew the person. There was a murder here, 100%. But we don't know who did it. And when there is a complete understanding on both sides where we don't find the murderer, but we don't want to start one killing each other, then the elders of both tribes come, and after slaughtering the animal, they will wash their hands from the blood, and they will say, our hands did not shed this blood. But most important, after saying, we don't know, don't tell that this is this tribe or that tribe, listen to what it says, and do not hold your people guilty of the blood of an innocent person. Okay? This washing of the hands is cleaning a collective body. It's not one person. It's not Pilate saying, I'm okay. The Roman world, the Roman collective is exempted. And I brought here another passage from the book of Samuel where you will read the same thing about washing the hands. It's in the case of Avner, and David says, I'm clean from that blood, and this blood will not go on my family. So it's always something that you do which designates a bigger collective, all right? So what I want to say is that when Matthew writes this, I think this is, okay, me, historian, Jewish, I don't have to believe every word. I think this is a way to say what Chaim Cohen wrote in his book. And that is that the story is told in a way that will exempt the Romans, indict the Jews, otherwise the story will not be well approved in the world around. And last thing, and I know my time is running out, is also in Matthew. He's the only one to say that after the burial, there is bribe on the part of the priests because they are already devising something evil. In the book of Matthew, I have a very, very big problem of bad representation of Jewish people. And it doesn't come well as a historian, again, with what I know about Pontius Pilate, from Philo, from Josephus, and we have not something that I have to teach you. You know that Pilate has very bad reputation by the world outside. Now, I don't want to say that I only teach them the nasty stuff. Here in this, by the way, manuscript, you see how Jesus and Pilate are together, the same height, holding hands. Who is on the other side of the accusers? The Jewish people. So Kristen Stendhal, who I assume most of you know or heard, the professor in Harvard that was the bishop of Stockholm, and a very engaging interreligious activist. So he said, as the story evolved and expanded, the weighty blame on Christ's crucifixion was forwarded from Pontius Pilate to the high priests, from the high priests to the Perushim, and onwards to the entirety of Judaism. I skip down. This tactic meant severing Jesus and his followers entirely from ascribing to Judaism, and instead positioning him alongside Pilate and the Roman world. So when I teach this historically, then they're like, okay, so we're not generally against Christianity and Jesus, but we are against Christianity that tells such a story. When I teach, I cause my people to actually feel very much at ease with Jesus, but not with the story of the New Testament, and the question, how do people in general perceive this? Also Karl Barth, I use Karl Barth in his fundamentals, where he takes the creed and analyzes every sentence. He says, what does Pilate do? He does whatever politicians have always done, more or less, and what is tied to the practical configuration of politics at all times. He is trying to save and restore law and order in Jerusalem while reserving his throne by sacrificing the evident justice which he was ordered to keep. So he's the villain. Karl Barth sees Pontius Pilate as the villain. So I'm teaching two Christian theologians who are also critical of that version of the Gospel of Matthew. Did I lose you? Is it okay? See what I'm trying to say? I'm teaching a problematic text. Now, I suggest historically that it was influenced by a biblical scholar called Matthew, who wrote it because of Parashat Eglah Ufa, because of that portion, but also that Christian theologians are also critical. It's not me teaching you how to read it critically. It's Christian theologians who read it critically. So who killed Jesus? Okay, I'll tell you very briefly. I was invited, I was honored to go to a round table when the Patriarch of Jerusalem was Michel Sabach. And he invited a round table of Jews and Christians to speak about the hard issues. And then after we spoke, I was presenting how Jewish people teach and study about Christianity. And then we split to small tables, and I was seated with a clergyman, maybe from Bejala or Bethlehem, I don't remember when. And I said, look, I have a problem with this text. Why did I have a problem with the text of the two that goes to Emmaus? Those that go to Emmaus, they tell what has happened, and they say, the chief priests and our rulers, they handed him, they sentenced him, and they crucified him. He said, I read it, and I read Greek. Of course, if you study Christianity, you read. So I have the Greek text, I have the Hebrew. It comes out quite simply that they crucified him. So it can be. We all know that they did not crucify him. But when you say that they were so motivated that actually they can be blamed for crucifying him, what do you say about that? Now, next to me sat someone, I think he was a Dominican. I'll try to remember his name. And he said, look, you have to understand, this is Luke's perspective. And this is how he tells the story. You don't have to take it literally. It is how he poses. And the clergyman and Bejala said, listen, it's written they crucified him. Chalas, they crucified him. I will never forget this because it was like an eye-opener. There are two clergymen, and one is presenting this like critical, biblical critical analysis, it's Luke, and the other one is saying, well, it's written, finished. Okay, so, yeah. Last thing, okay, well, it's too difficult, yeah, but, all right. Last thing I'll tell you is, not this way. Okay. My students ask me now that we're in the book of Acts. We just finished chapter 15. Chapter 15 is the one where for the final time we see Peter. That's it. He will not appear anymore in the book of Acts. And they all started, hey, the tradition of Quo Vadis. Where? You're saying this is the last chapter, but where is Quo Vadis in the next chapters? And I'm saying, no, it's not in the New Testament. What do you mean it's not in the New Testament? It's not. So where did he go? I said, tradition says he went to Rome and he was crucified, but it's not in... And then one of them says, isn't it true that also Paul is not executed in the Acts of the Apostles? And then comes the thing. Oh, you actually, in this very text, don't want to give the Romans even the role of being the crucifiers and the executors of the two chief pillars of the church. Okay? So it's, okay, there's like almost a conspiracy theory here. Everything in the New Testament is in order not to have, and when we looked back and we saw really all the executions in this book are always the Jewish people are executing, and I don't need to tell you that the story of Stephanos is here, but I don't have too much time for that. But it's also difficult when they come here. And the very, very last is the Jews in the New Testament parables, where we always teach, because we love this material, because we have so many parables in the Jewish sources, and it's lovely to make the comparison, but there are some of those that at times I would go to my big master, which was Father Dr. David Newhouse, like calling him, listen, I have this question from a student, what should I answer? When it says that the stupid virgins were late, and as in this beautiful manuscript, the door was shut, they asked me, do they mean the Jewish people? Now, I've been asking so many Christians that question, and so many said, what? It's those that are stupid and are late and do not... And David Newhouse says, I'm sorry. Yeah. It was written at the time when the competition was very strong. He was always very, very honest with me, never trying to make things easier. But, again, he said, it's what you make with this. But what Matthew wrote is what he wanted to show. Okay? But just to tell you that we have similar passages. It's an amazing parable about people that are late, the stupid that are late. So, was that against non-Jews? No. It's against people, etc. So finally, I'm finishing off with this. Oberammergau. Why did I go to Oberammergau? Because in Oberammergau, the story of the Passion was once very brutal anti-Jewish. I don't know how much you know about that, but Hitler saw it twice and said that every German should go and see this. It was brutal. The Jewish people were shown in the worst positions possible. This year, and this is, by the way, not a picture of this year, the presentation was not only dramatically different, and it's like a whole different lecture to see the textbooks. It's amazing to see what they've done. And in the booklet, in the beginning, there is the acceptance and the signature of two theologians, a Catholic German theologian and a Protestant theologian. So it's not like a hippie, avant-garde Oberammergau crew who's trying to change. It's theologically founded. And in there, in the way it was put this year, anyone have been there to the... You've been to this one? Wow. So you may remember how Pontius Pilate is dressed. He is dressed as a Gestapo officer. It is so striking when you see, dressed in black leather. This is not even Pontius Pilate, it's just one of his soldiers, but when you see him, it is striking. So I am bringing to my listeners the problematics, but also the possibility for a change and for transformation, and to tell them, listen, in Oberammergau, and by the way, my family is from Munich, and so I have my share in the cemeteries and the non-cemeteries of Germany, but I've been there and I've seen people who've done such a progress, which is so promising and so courageous. So maybe we should study Christianity just in order to know that you can do changes, you can transform. And maybe that is my final message. That's it.